Welcome to Impulse, the podcast on all things startup, tech, and venturing related, brought to you by Rayhound Ventures. Today I welcome Linda Yates, the founder and CEO of Mach 49, as well as author of The Unicorn Within, How Companies Can Create Game-Changing Ventures at Startup Speeds. Linda is a seasoned CEO with over 30 years of experience creating global strategy and driving innovation for large multinationals around the world. As a native of Silicon Valley, she has an extensive network and has served as a bridge between the startups and VCs of Silicon Valley and the boardrooms and C-suites of international corporations throughout her career. Her firm helps unlock the potential for future growth through corporate venturing by building growth engines. Together, we talk about the risks that legacy companies face if they do not leverage core assets to find new avenues for growth. We go into how corporate venturing needs to become an integrated part of strategic development. We outline how corporate venturing can be implemented, the kind of talent that is necessary to do so. We talk about cultural friction within organizations and how to overcome it. And we explain the differences between corporate venture building and corporate venture capital, and how these disciplines can actually complement each other. We also talk about many other things. So here, I welcome now Linda Yates.
Thanks, Nils. Thanks for having me.
Linda, our topic today is corporate venturing, or let's say the opportunities and challenges of corporate venturing, a field you're very familiar with. And before we get there, please just give our listeners a rundown of your story and what brought you to your current position as founder and CEO of Mach 49.
Great. Thanks so much. So I always start my introduction by saying that I'm a native Californian, which is only interesting because I grew up with all the people who founded the venture capital industry. They were all friends of my family. So I've been deeply rooted and connected in Silicon Valley basically my entire existence. But most of my professional career has been in the boardrooms and C-suites of the Global 500. So investment banking, corporate finance and M&A, back to Stanford for graduate school, and then on into kind of traditional strategy consulting, where I ended up running the West Coast and co-leading the high-tech and telecommunications practice, ultimately moving to Amsterdam to run the high-tech practice in Europe. So although I'm a local, I've lived, worked, or traveled in about 70 countries, so pretty global in my perspective. I've seen it all. We could talk about it all. From the Mac Group, I was very, very lucky to have been recruited by the two professors who, if you are a student of corporate innovation, you will remember that the two professors who actually pioneered that field were Gary Hamel at London Business School and C.K. Prahalad at the University of Michigan. And they pioneered the field of corporate innovation with the publication of their book, Competing for the Future, which was published by Harvard Press in 1994. This just means I've been doing this work a very long time. Clay Christensen would write Innovator's Dilemma off the back of the success of Gary and CK's book. And Gary and CK had all these people, especially Gary, who decided to really found the company as the chairman of what we called Strategos, decided that, to create a firm that was focused exclusively on corporate innovation, not strategy, not operations improvement, not marketing. And he needed someone who was bilingual between the boardrooms and C-suites of the Global 1000 and the startups and VCs of Sand Hill Road. And so he recruited me to become the founding CEO of a company we called Strategos, which gave me a front seat to that whole emergence of a brand new industry called corporate innovation. That company was very successful. We ended up selling it. I went back into Silicon Valley to rekindle my roots and spend time with startups and the venture world. I became a board member of a New York Stock Exchange traded company and sat on that board for 10 years. And then I was nominated and selected for a Henry Crown Fellowship at the Aspen Institute, which is an amazing think tank here and policy developer in the United States and actually globally. So that was amazing. And that was still about 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, what happened was, if you think about the origins of the venture capital industry, when it was founded 50 years ago, they were investing in all the dreamers, people who were creating whole new industries. But about 10 or 15 years ago, they started investing in the disruptors, going after every single industry all across the globe. So what was happening is all these large companies were flocking to Silicon Valley, kind of trying to figure out what hit them or looking for that innovation fairy dust to be sprinkled upon them. I am not a big believer in corporate tourism, but because of our work at Strategos, I am 100% was a big believer in the ability of large companies to disrupt themselves from the inside out and the outside in through venture building and venture investing to drive meaningful growth. They have ideas, they have talent, they have brand, they have channels, they have customers, they have core competencies, assets. There was literally no reason big companies could not beat the startups at their own game. So I looked around and I said, I'm going to create the Y Combinator for the Global 1000. And Y Combinator in our world, obviously, is the granddaddy of startup incubators with $1 trillion of returns over time. And but I was going to do it in a very different way. And the three things were fundamentally different is that we were going to focus 100% on execution, helping people do venture building and venture investing. And now we've developed that into what we call the Growth Institute to really teach people how to do that. The second thing was if you're going to do venture building, venture investing, and you're going to focus on execution, you need how to do it. So that means we hired no consultants. We joke you have to have gray hair or no hair to work with us because everyone on the team are either successful serial entrepreneurs, top tier VCs who are now semi-retired or C-suite executives. So we are doing what we're teaching. And then the last thing was, which is super, super important, is that we were going to build capability, not dependency. So the publication of the book, The Unicorn Within, How Companies Can Create Game-Changing Ventures at Startup Speed, that Harvard published October of 2022, very, very blessed by its worldwide success, was the fulfillment of our promise to democratize what we do. And conversations like this are the fulfillment of our commitment to basically build capability, not dependency. That's what we're doing.
Okay. I mean, you really have an amazing career kind of at the nucleus of what became a discipline called corporate venturing. And with corporate venturing, we talk about corporate venture building and corporate venture capital. We can get into that. But before we go there, I'm based in Europe currently. And our company was also founded in Europe. Coming from traditional manufacturing, we had a great period of growth and success. And, a few years ago, we also started to now delve into corporate venturing as a tool for new growth. But what I do observe is that there are some players that might be similar to us that are starting to get into this. There are some success cases as well, but there's a whole league of companies that haven't really touched on that. So what would your pitch be to a maybe more traditionally based company on why corporate venturing is an essential tool for new growth and for development?
Yeah, that was a great question. So interestingly enough, I would say 95% of the companies we work with are A, global, B, multinational, multi-billion dollar companies, often public companies, and often, 50 to 150 years old, right? So they're all in your category. And I think the real issue here is, there's an existential issue around growth, right? So everyone has really got to be focused on growth. If you think about it, if you look at the Pricewaterhouse at Davos does a survey every year, and they surveyed 4,400 CEOs. And of those 4,400 CEOs, 40% of them said that they would no longer be in business within 10 years if they did not fundamentally transform. And the statistics actually bear people out. If you look at the companies on the Fortune 500 list 50 years ago, the average life of a company on the Fortune 500 list was 75 years. Today, it's 15 years and declining. And the scarier statistic is that of the companies that were on the Fortune 500 list 50 years ago, 88% of them are out of business, off the list, or totally irrelevant. So the reality is, it is those bigger, older industrial companies that absolutely must change. They must move into kind of figure out kind of what that from to shift that they're going to make. And even if you don't think they're going to go out of business, if you look today, there are over 1,200 unicorns around the world, right? This is US, Europe, this is Israel, this is India, this is the Middle East, this is Africa. If you look around the world, there are over 1,200 unicorns today, valued at almost $4 trillion. So what does that mean? That means that large companies are leaving a lot of money on the table because there is literally no reason that Airbnb could not have been created by any of the large hotel companies, that Uber could not have come out of one of the large automobile companies. 3M, frankly, invented the digital sticky. Miro board came out of Europe. It's currently valued at $17 billion. It's a digital sticky solution that 3M invented the sticky and laid off 2,000 people 3 months ago, right? So it's really this concept of large companies have this extraordinary breadth of capabilities within their grasp. They just need to unleash it. And that's our whole point, is that there is no difference between two 25-year-olds sitting over a card table in Silicon Valley, right, with a cardboard box and, takeout food, than any of the incredible talent that exists inside these large companies.
I think it's an excellent point. And from my own experience, I think, the cultural challenge in these large organizations is that they've had a lot of success over decades or over generations. So in their mind, they're doing everything right. And therefore, corporate venturing, seems like this, kind of exotic discipline, which, maybe you can do, but, who really knows what comes out of it? But what you're saying is that it's not that. It needs to become an integral part of a strategy to ensure your viability and your relevance for the next years and the next generations. And I think that's, a point that really needs to be driven home. And let's say, your message resonates, an organization takes this on as a challenge, understands the relevance. What would be the necessary steps on kind of a practical level to start moving in this direction based on your experience?
Yeah. So number one is, the way we talk about this is we talk about your goal over time is to build a pipeline and portfolio of ventures through venture building and or venture investing across the spectrum of new venture creation, from ideate to incubate to accelerate to scale. We can get into some of those steps. But at a meta level, to get to that, you've got to build what we call your growth engine. That growth engine sits on 4 pillars. One is organic venture building. And there's reasons why you want to do that, as well as, there's disrupting inside out and disrupting outside in, right? The inside out is the venture building. The outside in is the venture investing. It could also be strategic partnering, or what we call targeted M&A. You need all 4 of those pillars. So the organic venture building, you're doing inside because you want to be able to give that opportunity to people inside, because then they're going to be good kind of growth advocates, if you will, for the future. So you've got organic venture building. But the other option, one option's build, the other is buy, partner, invest. Strategic partnering. We have many companies that we work with who they don't do venture building and they don't actually have a CVC, but they're very good at sensing and responding to the outside market by doing really good strategic partnering. And there's good ways and bad ways to do that, right? But strategic partnering is important. And in some cases, for instance, like Halliburton Labs, they basically have an accelerator program that's fabulously successful, where they're providing access to their labs, their scientists, their channels, their customers, their go-to-market people. So there's lots of different renditions of how to get yourself involved into the global innovation ecosystem, if you will. So there's organic venture building, there's strategic, there's the CVC venture investing, there's the strategic partnering, and then this targeted M&A. What do I mean by that? Well, we have a client, we got their venture to 50 million in revenue. Amazing. That's a unicorn by Silicon Valley standards, but they're an $80 billion company. So that doesn't move the needle. But because of the work we were doing through the venture investing, they've been doing a lot of ecosystem mapping. They knew where there was a really successful startup that they could take $100 million of cash off their balance sheet, marry that startup to the internal venture to augment and accelerate it. The combined venture was $1 billion in valuation. That moves the needle. So I would say that the big thing is, number one, growth has to be on the agenda. If growth is not on your agenda, if you're just there to pay dividends to your shareholders, then this is never going to work, right? It's got to come from the top. There's got to be kind of a burning platform of some sort that says, we need to grow. We need to start looking at horizon 2, 3, 4 opportunities to leverage the mothership's advantage, but to get into new things. Then it's like, okay, where do I want to start? Do I want to start with venture investing? I'm going to design a CVC and I'm going to go kind of pepper, my investments into a lot of different firms to start to dip my toe in the water. Or do I want to start, I have this really cool idea and I want to just build one venture and just see if we can do it. Or in some cases, we have clients who basically want to build whole growth divisions. And I'll touch on that quickly because I think that's important, because there are people who, you got a CVC or you've got a venture factory or a venture studio. In some cases, they have whole growth divisions. And typically for those people, it's because they want to separate the startups. We have one client who basically want to do 20 ventures a year, 10 from the inside, 10 from the outside. And the reality was they're like, okay, but we do semiconductors. So, and we're going to be looking at a whole bunch of other things. So what they wanted to do is to, in essence, take the metrics of and apply the metrics that are relevant to a startup to their internal ventures, not squeeze those, not judge those ventures on the core and legacy business on a quarterly basis. So they create whole separate growth divisions. So now they can get a blended multiple with the financial analysts in the public market.
I think maybe that's something we can get back to. It's important to create a certain space so that these venture activities have the room, the time, and the necessary mindset that's necessary for them to be successful. But if we just get back a bit to the understanding that corporate venturing is a vital, essential tool for creating future growth. And what you're also saying is that, usually these organizations have amazing assets, which, really need to be tapped into. Now, if we, again, say an organization has bought into this, they're willing to go the way, most likely they're going to be bringing on board other talents, outside talents. Or do you believe in the entrepreneurship approach, the intrapreneurship approach, something I'm rather skeptical of. But in any way, you have then, a completely new team or a completely new organization within the corporate. I mean, again, we're coming from a world where these companies have been successful, right? So what are your thoughts on the potential cultural clash?
They've been successful, but for many of the companies that you're talking about, Europe and elsewhere, and especially in Europe, because Europe, there's a statistic out there for Europe, which is you're leading in R&D dollars spent and lagging in the ability to commercialize and monetize those R&D. And this is what is really important. This is important because literally most of these large companies, most of them are really interested in moving from being value stocks to being growth stocks. And so, again, I think if growth is on the agenda, I do not think that they have the alternative. I think there's another meta level thing I want to say, and then I'll come back to the talent thing, because there's actually 4 types of talent you need to be thinking about. But the meta level thing is, when I founded the company, there were 2 altruistic reasons that I founded it. One is that people are living longer and longer because of healthcare and technology. Okay. And that means that those people, they're going to be living longer, which means they're going to be working 60, 70, 80 years. They need meaningful, purposeful work during that 60, 70, 80 years that they're working. And although many people love startups, honestly, most of those people are employed by large companies. And those large companies, therefore, to provide that meaningful, purposeful work and to provide growth opportunities long across somebody's career, they need to look more like Berkshire Hathaway. They need to look more like Alphabet, where they are a portfolio of companies. That allows you, if you think of yourself as a large company in terms of a portfolio, it allows you to be closer to the customer, more agile, provide more creative and entrepreneurial opportunities for people who are inside your organization. It allows you to kill things faster when they don't work. You stop being a monolith and you start being more agile. And so I think that's a really important thing for people as they're thinking about growth, to think about, well, how do I want to grow? Do I just want to build another silo? No, because that silo is going to still follow this path. The second altruistic reason is that I truly believe that the large companies are the only ones who can solve the big, hairy problems we face in the world. sustainability, climate change, water, disease, poverty, racism. Those things need our large companies leaning in to drive change, to innovate, to experiment, and to disrupt, because many governments are relatively transitional at best and dysfunctional at worst. And NGOs, we love them, but they can't solve problems at global scale in the way these guys, that large companies can. So if you basically have these things in your head, and you look at the money you're leaving on the table, and you look at the failure rates, who knew Kodak was going to go out of business or GE was going to get sold for parts, right? Like there is no alternative but to think about this, and you can't pave the cow path and do something you've always done. Now is the time to look at a portfolio. When you look at that, then you look at what talent you have. You are correct. In some cases, you bring talent from the outside. But in many cases, the talent exists inside your organization. And there's typically 4 types of people that when you are thinking about building ventures or doing venture investing that you need to be thinking about. Number 1 is obvious. If you're doing venture building, you've got your internal entrepreneurs, your intrapreneurs, right? Those are the people who are going to be incubating and accelerating those ventures. They're going to be running those businesses long as you graduate them into their own lines of business or a wholly owned subsidiary or as a product line if you take it back into an existing business unit. So those guys are pretty obvious. Not everybody is meant to be an internal entrepreneur. They can't handle the pace. They don't like the lack of structure. They don't like talking to customers. So it is very clear. There's a whole part in my book about getting started about the people and the how-to guide to selecting people. Because the number one thing that kills a new venture, other than the fact that there's not enough customer pain to solve, are toxic teams. So that is an obvious group. The second group is the new venture board. There are 3 things that cause companies to fail on when they're doing venture building, venture investing, building a growth engine. Number 1 is they have no methodology. They throw spaghetti against the wall. They hope it sticks, right? That doesn't work for a large company. If you look at most venture capitalists or most kind of even a Y Combinator, their success rates are like 8, 10, 12%. No public company will get away with that kind of failure rate. So you've got to have methodology so that you have a repeatable, scalable model. The second thing is internal friction, right? You don't seize the mothership advantage. You basically let the inertia, the orthodoxies, the antibodies basically thrive and kill things or starve them of oxygen. But the third thing is that your senior executives fail to grow. So the second team that is very important is what we call the new venture board. These are those senior executives who need to learn to become top tier venture capitalists. They need to learn to think in terms of portfolio, not throwing all your eggs in one basket. They need to learn to think in terms of option value, not net present value. They need to think in terms of a whole new set of metrics that don't look like the core and legacy business, like customer acquisition rates or revenue growth, right? Which is what gets a startup in Silicon Valley a 20x multiple compared to your 2x multiple. So the new venture board is very critical. They are the ones who make the go, no-go decision, the fund, no fund decision. They provide access to the core competencies and assets. They provide access to the customers and channels that differentiate you from any well-funded startup, and they help remove the friction. That's the second team. When we work with people, we put them side by side, real VCs, on the new venture board, so they learn what kind of questions to ask. They don't sit back as management review board members and dump all over everything because the answer is always no. So they listen to Jeff Bezos and say the answer needs to be yes. So that's the second group. The third group are what we call, they are the people who are running your CVC or running your venture studio or your venture factory. They are what we call the Mach 49 inside. When we're working for a client, we're working ourselves out of a job. That's the group we're training to take on our role and to basically be able to do the venture building, venture investing on their own. And so that group has a learning journey as well. They're not the ones who are going to, because the problem is you've trained people on your venture team, the entrepreneurs, they know how to do it now, but now they're off running your business. They aren't going to do the next one. So you need a group that basically can perpetuate your growth engine. Then there's a fourth group that nobody thinks about. And these are what we call the growth advocates. What I say to any CEO anywhere in the world is, do not create the haves and the have-nots. Do not create the cool kids who get to do venture building and venture investing and the not cool kids stuck in the core and legacy business. And so there are people who don't want to be entrepreneurs, but they are entrepreneurial, and they will help transform your organization if you give them the opportunity to become what we call growth advocates. This is the person in legal who's going to write the 1-page document for a pilot agreement, not the 40-page. It's the people in HR who can find a growth hacker. It's the people in marketing who are not going to be the brand police and let you test things. It's the person in procurement who, when we're working with a dog food and pet food company on a integrated hardware software collar, and they don't have a pre-approved hardware vendor on your pre-approved vendor list, that person's going to get it through and get it pre-approved in 2 weeks, not 2 months or 2 years. So those are the four. When you think about talent, the point about building a growth engine is there's room for everybody. And that's very, very important, but you've got to be very clear on what are the characteristics of someone who's going to be on a venture team versus someone who's going to be a growth advocate versus someone who can facilitate the work versus someone who is going to be a new venture board member.
Okay. I mean, I think we've covered, the different skill sets, the different kind of talents you need. But getting back now to really, tapping into those corporate assets, and you talked about, some of the services coming from the mothership, but a lot of the mothership effect, or let's say those potential assets, lie just in the business itself. Could be technological know-how. It's often also just access to market. It's access to expert networks, which really help then, your venture builder, or potentially even your CVC arm, to identify the right opportunities to go after. And based on your experience, what's the best way to then really tap into that? Because I think there's another whole level of potential friction and antibodies. And it's, what are these guys now nosing around in our business? What do they want from us? What's the benefit for us in the core organization? I think that's another just, huge kind of hurdle. So what are your experience in that regard?
This is why we started building growth advocates. That's one of the main reasons why we did it, is because now you are tapping into people across the organization. So one of the things that we always get people to do from the very beginning is what we call an asset jam. What are all the things that you're bringing? So I had dinner in Silicon Valley with the incoming new CEO of a very large European auto manufacturer. And they wanted to start CVC. And because you are exactly correct that what the mothership needs to do for your investments as a CVC is exactly the same as what you need to do for your internal ventures that you're building. It's no different. You still need to be able to shepherd and deliver your superpowers to it. But he asked me, he said, Linda, I want to prove to Silicon Valley that we're here, that we're engaged. How much money do I need to put in my fund to prove that we're for real and we want to be part of this ecosystem? Is it 50 million euro? Is it 100 million euro? Is it 150 million euro? And I looked across the table and I said, it's this much. It's zero. He said, zero? What do you do? My guys are telling me I got to put so much money in. I said, think about it. Silicon Valley does not need your money, right? I said, they're sitting on billions of dollars of capital. I said, how many customers do you have? He said, 30 million. I said, okay, let's start there. So the number one thing that, that people need to understand, whether you're venture building or you're venture investing, is to go back and do an assessment. We often will start with a client with what we call a growth assessment, right? Growth readiness assessment. And part of that is, what are these things that you have that you take for granted, that are amazing assets, competencies, people, skills, channels, access to global market, supply chain expertise. So we'll do what we call an asset jam, which is we'll go through an inventory. What are all those things that are really, really important to that you can bring to bear to leverage it? So we had a large German utility company. This is a fascinating story. So they had a venture that they wanted to do because they wanted to enter the US market. Okay. And so they had a really cool venture out of the Netherlands that was around creating microgrids around greenhouses. So they thought, okay, we'll use that and we'll enter the US market. So as the US market deregulates, people will know our name. Well, guess what? In 2 weeks, we killed that venture. Why? We don't have a lot of greenhouses in North America. So that wasn't there was not enough for them to do. But in the process of doing the customer development work that they did, and we can talk about kind of the understanding customer pain, like the model, is in the process of doing that, they realized that there was this huge problem, and that there were a lot of people, especially small, medium-sized businesses, but even more importantly, large companies with individual units. So take a Whole Foods or an IKEA, where you do your energy in an aggregate, but you can't manage energy in the aggregate. You got to manage it by the box, right? And so their amazing core competence was in billing and understanding tariffs. So we could pivot the whole opportunity to, wait a minute, are people being billed correctly? Are they in the right tariff? Okay, if they are, then is their equipment working as efficiently as it should be? Okay, if it's not, guess what? Now we have a marketplace of people who can service it. If the equipment's okay, it's just old, but maybe they need new equipment. And then maybe it's not about equipment, it's about basically buying alternative energy contracts. So now there was this huge opportunity because they had this core competence that they would never have thought about creating a venture about. And so it is really important for companies to step back and not be humble and not think that they don't know something compared to a startup somewhere around the world, because you know everything. You just haven't unleashed it or haven't looked at it through a different lens. And R&D, by the way, one of the biggest things that we're working on is R&D for the 21st century, because the R&D groups around the world are getting completely hammered because, of course, they're 5%, 4% of revenue being committed to that, but it's not commercializing, monetizing. And so we're going in and literally working with, people who haven't seen a lot of engineers. They're not used to talking to customers. They're not comfortable with that. And then all of a sudden they become evangelists for, wait a minute, yes, we can be the front end, but we can move things through a pipe.
Maybe at this point, I mean, we talked about now really, mapping those assets, understanding them, and then, hopefully with that understanding, leveraging the potential that they have. But let's get back to the customer pain part, right? Because I mean, that's then the other part of the equation where you need to then ultimately marry an asset with a pain point, with a problem, and how do you help companies, kind of navigate that field?
So a couple of things. So here's what so what I like to say to people is, look, the not so secret of the Silicon Valley is it's not that hard. Okay. There's 3 fundamental principles to think about. Number one, where we start, is it's all about understanding customer pain. I tell C-suites and boards all over the world that, listen, surveys are statistically significant and strategically irrelevant because all you've done is outsource your visceral understanding and empathy for the customer to somebody else, who's then going to repackage it and sell it to somebody else, right? You must do your own customer development work. And by the way, we are very clear in the words customer development. We are not saying user research. Every interview that a venture team does with a customer is literally an opportunity to get them excited and get them to think that you were there to solve their pain, not just sell them something. So it's understanding customer pain. No one in the world knew they wanted a microwave oven, a DVR, or a minivan. They didn't say radiate my food, please. What they said was, I don't have time to cook a healthy meal. I literally never get to watch my favorite shows. I have to, my kids are going a million places and they're doing sports, and we got dogs and we got kids and field trips. We're going a million places. They could tell you their pain. It was up to someone to invent the DVR, invent the minivan, invent the microwave oven to basically solve that pain. So understanding customer pain is the number one thing. Everything starts with understanding customer pain. If you want to incubate a venture, there's only 2 things you need. The number one thing is a hypothesis on the pain you're trying to solve. So that's number one. Then you take that pain, you marry it with the art of the possible. So what are the current technology and trends that you can use to solve that pain? Uber doesn't exist if we don't have real-time payments, mobile phones, GPS, right? This couldn't exist. So the reason why we like it when we say that the venture factory and the CVC are the yin and the yang of each other, the reason why we do that is because the CVC is the one who should be sensing and responding outside what technologies are happening, what trends are happening. It's why I'm not a big believer in CVCs being completely separate from the mothership. they have to add value back to the mothership, right? One of the things you asked me before is why would the inertia, the antibodies kick up? People are like, well, not invented here. Why are we doing this, et cetera? Well, typically when that happens is when you're not engaging the mothership, or when people think they're so cool that they should be spun out and they're going to become venture capitalists, but they're going to leverage the mothership's dollars. No, that's not right. They need to basically be sensing and responding and giving back. Same with the internal ventures. When we have to build a business and execution plan, there's a gives and gets page. What does the mothership need to give this venture to be successful? But this is what the venture is going to give back to the mothership. So why the mothership should care. So I think it's really important for people to be really focused on that. But you got to understand customer pain. You got to marry it with the art of the possible, and then you have to place a series of small bets. When we think about Silicon Valley, we think about funding in the Silicon Valley. We think about it like an onion. Every layer of onion is a layer of risk. It could be market risk, could be technical risk, could be financial risk. In the case of a large company, it could be governance risk. You love it to death and you starve it of oxygen, right? And so for an entrepreneur, whether you're an external entrepreneur or you're an internal entrepreneur, your job is to figure out how to remove the greatest amount of risk and the least amount of capital. So when we build ventures for large companies, when those internal entrepreneurs, they have to build an experimentation plan that is that basically identifies the risks. What are the small bets experiments that we are going to run to prove we can mitigate those risks? What are the metrics and milestones that demonstrate we have removed those risks? Only then do you unlock subsequent rounds of funding. You don't get tons of money right at the start. You get little bits to run small bets, experiments, and pilots. Then it grows, then it grows, and then it grows.
Right. I mean, I think you explained very clearly, how marrying, the market potential posed by certain problems and your internal assets could lead to a venture. And I think the instinct would be, well, okay, let's go and build it, right? So, we go through that, and yes, we only feed it a little bit at a time to really kind of, harden it, and maybe we need to even place different bets to try and address that problem. So that's the kind of classic venture building. Where does now corporate venture capital come in? Because that's a different kind of mechanism there. I mean, here you're going out and you're placing bets on outside startups. So explain a bit how that comes together in the end.
Yeah. So before we go to venture capital, though, let's talk about that venture building, because most people don't do it well. So because the thing I want to make sure that people understand is that there's when you think about venture building, there's 3 stages. There's ideate, there's incubate, there's accelerate. And so I think it's super important for people to go all the way up to the ideate phase, because it's garbage in, garbage out, right? And so when we work with companies, they typically come to us at one of 4 they're in one of 4 buckets. One is they have too many ideas, right? So they're overwhelmed. They don't know how to sort through them. So and I'm happy to share this with you, and you can share it. It's actually, I think, in the book as well. But there's a new venture assessment tool that we get people to think about, which has different criteria for how are you going to decide what you're going to do. From desirability, does anybody want it? Feasibility, is it buildable? Viability, are you going to be able to make money? Suitability, should we, as the mothership, do we have the assets and capabilities to do it? Capability, do we have a team to do it? And in some cases, to your point, you can bring people in from the outside. You don't, but we like you to start with internal people, because otherwise you build up resentment. And then in a lot of people's cases now, they're using climate and sustainability as another tool. But ideate, so there's kind of too many ideas. There's, we're interested in food, water, and road safety. Well, you can't incubate water. But you can incubate a zero water home, which we've done with a client. So you've got to in some cases, they need to do a domain exploration, like what's out there, what water. We did a domain exploration for a client around wind. Well, it turns out wind is like 16 different segments. So where do you want to play? Now you're getting closer to an idea that you can incubate. The third way is to do a venture competition. There's good ways and bad ways to do venture competitions, but venture competitions are a great way to shake out where your internal entrepreneurs are, people who have ideas. Again, we can go into that later. There's also information in the book on it about the good ways and the bad ways to do them. The fourth is, okay, I have an idea. And then you go into what we call challenge statement, building a challenge statement, which are what I said before. What's the pain you're trying to solve? What's your hypothesis on that? And then the stakeholder map of who matters most. Then those two things give you a starting point for starting Incubate on Monday, which is now, who are we going to go interview? Then you go into Incubate. So you got a great idea, you go into Incubate. There's 3 phases of Incubate. There's the customer, then there's product, and then there's business. Figuring out if there's enough pain. If there's not enough pain, you kill it. Going into product, if the solve that pain is time travel, we don't have time travel. You got to shelve it because the product's not feasible. You got to buy, partner, invest, to do something. Only if there's enough customer pain and there's a feasible solution that you can buy, partner, invest, or build, then you bother with the business case. Many CEOs ask for the business case first. Airbnb got rejected by 40 VCs because who the heck, they were couchsurfing.com. That was their first name. Nobody was going to go couch surfing, right? Nobody believed it. But in fact, it was true, but they needed to go out and do the customer interviews to prove it. And then because you can't size a market, you don't know if, what it is yet. You haven't done it. So then you go, so that's Incubate. Congratulations, you haven't killed it, but you got to learn to kill it during those phases. Then you go to Accelerate. And this is where most large companies fall down. Getting from 0 to 1 in the market is very hard. And the main reason they fall down is, first of all, they don't understand that when you move to Accelerate, there's still like 3 phases. There's a build to validate, there's a build to automate, and then there's a build to scale. And many large companies are really good at the automate and scale phase. They fall down on the build to validate. And part of the reason they do is because they focus just on product at that point. They don't realize that, yeah, you keep experimenting with the product, but you're trying to build a new company, a new line of business. And so there's actually 5 things that you need to be thinking about and experimenting and placing those small bets I talked about. One is the product. You're going to keep iterating and experimenting with product. The second is your go-to-market. Are you using inside sales, field sales, digital? How are you reaching your customer? You're going to experiment there. Small bets, experiments, not a lot of money. Number 3 is business model. How are you going to basically, how are you going to make money? How do your customers want to pay? There's a very great piece of research that I would encourage you to share with your listeners by St. Gallen around the fact that there's really only 40 viable business models. And I'll send you a copy. There's a public version, and then people can buy the more detailed version from them. It's a group of researchers, just a brilliant piece of work. That really, there's only 40 viable business models in the world that anybody's using. So it's not like there's an infinite number of things to be considering in the business model. And then those 3 things might be perfect, but if to deliver the product, service, or solution is so expensive, you can't get to positive unit economics, then you're dead in the water. And then the last place is exactly what you talked about before, which was team. Do you have the team, whether inside or you have to recruit from the outside, to basically ensure this thing can thrive? Regardless, one of the things we're working a lot on with people is how you're compensating people, both whether it's a CVC or you're your venture factory or it's your ventures. You already compensate your salespeople for performance. There's no reason why you can't have phantom shares or other things to basically compensate people. So I think it's important. And now I'll go to the venture investing, but it's really important for people to understand, because most people fail at the incubation and the acceleration at the venture building. That's why we don't use incubate, accelerate. We use venture building, because there are a lot of people out there who go, we'll incubate it. And then they drop a big company and they drop this venture off the cliff and think they know how to basically go into the market and get from 0 to 1. Like they don't. It's a long time. So it's very important to be very methodical, very rigorous, very robust in the model you use. And when you get to the end, you are building a very full business and execution plan. This is not Shark Tank. This is not a 5-minute demo pitch. This is a very rigorous and robust. And I literally have a whole chapter on the book on basically what that business execution plan should look like. So that's really kind of rounds out kind of on the venture building side. I just didn't want your listeners to kind of think, okay, great, I'm going to go incubate, because the success rate of most corporate venture incubators without a methodology and without thinking about these things is only 8%. And you need to be at more like 75%. So incubation and accelerate the venture building is important. Venture investing is a completely different animal, but it's not, from the mothership's perspective, it's actually not that different, to my point earlier, which is you really do need to have the innovation ecosystem built inside to support the same one that would support your internal ventures is the same one that would support your external ventures, because what you're bringing to the table are your assets and your capabilities, those things that they need to make you a very good strategic partner. Where I see most large companies fall down is that they don't actually realize that their job is not just to be a CVC. Their job is actually to be a top tier venture capital. They want to bring the principles and practices and the equivalent of the people. It can be learned, but they want to build that capability, because there's only two things that really matter in venture capital. It's deal flow and decision making. You can have the best deal flow in the world, but if you take 3 weeks and 40-page investment theses that have to circulate to 50 people before it gets approved, you will have the worst portfolio on the planet, because no great company is going to wait around for you to issue them a term sheet. They'll be gone. They're gone in 24, 48 hours. So it is super important to design your CVC right, to set it up right, to make sure your investment committee is small, agile, that you've got the ability to spend. So design is really important when it comes to doing CVCs and doing investing. So decision-making is really critical. The other is deal flow. And so the big challenge also is making sure that you are networked into the global innovation ecosystem such that you are hearing about the best deals on a timely manner. What you do not want, as a child of Silicon Valley, I can say this, you do not want the VCs to be sending you their dogs, right? Because that's what they want you to do. They want corporates to be dumb money, and they want them to invest in their dogs so you keep them alive long enough so they can raise the next fund so they can get another round of management fees and carry, okay? So it is super important for CVCs to really see themselves as top tier. The other thing that's really important about CVCs is they must, and it's important for your venture studios as well, you must drive financial impact. Anybody who just tells me that they're building a CVC just for strategic value will not be successful. And because if you're not a serious financial player, you are not going to get into the best deals, and the VCs are not going to take you seriously. And so you're going to think, oh, I saw this, so strategically that's interesting, but guess what? There were 5 others that you didn't see that you should have seen that were way more strategically interested. And so like the Qualcomm Ventures, which was one of the best in their day, they were formed, one, they had to make a financial return, but they were also genius in that what they were there to do was to invest in future industries that were going to require new types of chipsets. So augmented reality, autonomous vehicles, gaming, so that they could inform their R&D groups of what was coming, so that when the markets went scaled and became mass markets, they were ready. And so it's always important for the CVCs to be connected to the strategy of the mothership in some way, shape, or form. There's people will do them and to really understand why you're doing it. Are you doing it to learn? Are you doing it to network? Are you doing it to, in essence, create option value for yourself because it gives you opportunities to buy or partner with a firm in the future? But regardless, you've got to get your own house in order first to be able to be a good investor and a great strategic partner, or it's otherwise you won't get the returns. And I think this is the frustration that a lot of people have. They're like, why haven't we been successful? And it's because there are a number of reasons, but primarily it's because they actually didn't do the work they needed to do. They just threw a couple of people, gave them some money and said, go out and go find some interesting companies. They actually didn't realize that this is a very sophisticated industry, that they need to invest the time and energy and spend 4 weeks doing design, right? That's all you got to do. It doesn't take very long, but that forces you to be aligned as a senior executive team with your venture investing team, with your business unit heads, who are going to have to play a role because they're going to have to be able to do proof of concepts and things.
So if you're going to do CVC in a nutshell, what you're saying is you need to do it on par with the best VCs out there. And what it does is it gives you essentially a trend radar, kind of a far-reaching trend radar that in relevant fields, you will see what the future is bringing. And of course, that's why it's important then to link it back to the organization, because this should inform the organization.
Totally.
Talk a little bit more about what you are then bringing into the company that you're investing in, because it's not just capital, right? It's also, again, your assets. So you mentioned strategic partnering, and I think that's what makes CBC then very exciting for an organization, because again, it's about leveraging your assets. It's again a kind of a
100%.
mothership effect. Yeah.
It's also how you'll get the best deal flow. Because if you go to Benchmark or NEA or Foundation or Kleiner Perkins or Sequoia or Greylock, any of these top tier VCs, and you are a great strategic partner for their startups, guess what? They're going to bring you their next great startup, right? They're going to say, you want a little piece of this? Great. Thank you for all these amazing things you did. So that concept of building an innovation ecosystem inside, even if it's, again, I'm not talking about big T transformation, right? I'm talking about find that one person in legal who can help the startup navigate your paperwork for a POC much faster than 3 months, right? Somebody, get your supply chain expert who, when the 30-year-old CEO needs help, they answer them, in 24 hours, not 2 months. So it really is important for you to get your own act together. And the reason why for a lot of our clients, they got tremendous returns, they're poster children in the CDC world, is because the VCs know that we have built them, and they know that we come out of that, we are of their world. We've built them, and we've built them so that they are going to be great partners for them. So now they're willing to kind of bring them their best deals. Because the VCs, it really benefits the VCs to be having strategic partners with these startups, because if they're good, they're a sounding board. Hey, we're about to launch this product. What do you think? We're about to go into this market. What do you think? So having, and it's fun for people inside the big company too. Like many of our C-suite executives, the place where they look at it and they're like, wait, maybe when I'm retired, I want to do some angel investing, right? So what we find is it's kind of funny because, senior executives want a growth journey as well, right? They want to learn as well. So they might be the best operating executives in the world, but they really haven't done investing. This is their way to dip their toe in the water in a fairly low risk way to learn and to build those relationships and those connections, but while adding value at the same time. So that same asset jam that you do when you're thinking about venture building is the same asset jam you have to do when you're doing venture investing, because that's what it's like me saying to the CEO of the car company, how many customers do you have? He says 30 million. I'm like, let's start there. So, and this is what people, I think, underestimate. And I hate it when people call large companies dinosaurs. The media loves to call the incumbents the dinosaurs. It's just ridiculous. They're running multi-billion-dollar global companies. This is insane. And so there, but then there's this undervaluing of yourself as a large company, because you don't think, and I'm thinking, look, I love Silicon Valley. I love the startup world. It's amazing. I founded 2 companies myself. They've been very successful. But large companies are where most people are employed. Large companies are a huge part of the global economy, and they're very, very valuable. And it bothers me. It's a win-win-win, right? You've got the venture capital community or the private equity community. You've got large corporations. You've got the entrepreneurs. Then you've got universities. You've got enablers. You've got the accounting and other people. Like together, that ecosystem can create great things. And so I think on the venture investing side, but I do think venture investing, because companies are not going to go and right away do 30 internal ventures, right? I wouldn't recommend that they do that anyway. Start with one, prove to yourself that yes, you do have an amazing internal entrepreneurs, run a venture competition, do something that basically you kind of take baby steps to get there. The beauty of venture investing is it does allow you to learn faster than venture building would, because you can't build enough ventures internally, just because right now there's some PhD level opportunities that people have. But if you look at venture building right now, most big companies have to consolidate the expense of doing that in their P&L as opposed to doing it off their balance sheet. There are mechanisms to do that. But, and they right now often, and this is why we teach people to talk to the financial markets, they aren't getting the valuations that they deserve. If you compare their venture that looks just like a startup, the startup will get 20x, they'll get 2x because they're getting core and legacy business metrics, which is wrong. So you got to learn to talk. The CFOs must learn to talk to their financial markets. But I think that, but the CVC is an amazing way. Place small bets, place them fast, learn a lot, and then get that flywheel going. That flywheel will move faster than an internal venture building flywheel can by very definition move, because you're building a company from scratch as opposed to going into a company. But the thing you got to be careful of, very careful, is you don't get screwed on the valuations, right? Because this is why it is so important to be working with people who know, or someone on your team who has come out of that world, so that you are not, subject to wildly ridiculous. We just saved a client $225 million that they were going to go invest. They were going to buy a company that because we had backdoor due diligence, knew a lot about, and knew that the presentation that they had shown them about up and to the right as their growth path was the same presentation they presented 5 times, 5 different years. Same exact numbers, hadn't achieved them. And so, they were going to wildly overpay. Not that they didn't need the core competencies, but they were wildly overpay. And that was going to hurt them in 2 ways. Not only was it going to hurt them financially in that they would have never recognized a return, it would have hurt them reputationally because they would have looked like dumb money. And you just don't want to be in that position.
I mean, it's a small world out there in the VC community, and news travels fast. You don't want to be the one who overpaid. So, like you said, you have to be on par with the best in terms of capability. But what I really like about it, it has become clear through what you've explained that, again, the CVC and the CVP is kind of the yin and the yang, because the success factors are the same, right? Leveraging your assets, leveraging your advantages, leveraging the talent you have in the organization, using that as a channel, not just for future growth, but also to empower the organization to give new purpose. And then it's maybe a bit of a world of different speeds, right? If you build something yourself, you can tailor it more specifically to a problem that you see. And by investing, placing multiple bets on outside companies, you're just able to benefit from the speed of development and really getting that radar of what else is happening in the larger world that will impact you strategically a few years down the road. So that's, I think, really in a nutshell, just a beautiful plaidoyer why corporate venture needs to become part of that corporate skill set to make sure organizations stay relevant in the future. And
we call it growth. I mean, it's venture-driven growth. I mean, that's what it is. It's through venture building, venture investing, and you can do either. You can do both, but you can't do none.
Yeah. And look, what you're also, and I think this is a very, a positive message, is that, don't look at the startup ecosystem as being, this exotic world. It's just a way of looking at things. It's a way of building. It's a way of learning quickly, adapting, and then ultimately, the system kind of works out the viable solution, and then you're allowed to scale. And it's about taking that kind of approach into a more mature organization. It's absolutely possible.
And I think it's imperative. I think one of the things that is, I look at people who, I was just looking up, there's a book I'm going to also refer you to and your listeners to, but Jim Snabe, who is just brilliant. He was a co-CEO of SAP, and now he's a board member of a lot of different companies. And he has this line as a board member. He wrote this great book called Dreams and Details. And he has this great line when he sits on a board. And he says, okay, look, for the first half of the board meeting, if you want to look at the past and talk about that penny of wheat you want to save for what you want to build, et cetera, fine. We'll spend the first half of the board meeting on that. Before lunch, you can talk about the past. the past and the present. He said, after lunch, we are only focused on the future. We are only focused on growth. We are only focused on kind of the from two shifts we're going to do. And then he has this great line. He says, please don't let lunch be served too late. Right? And his whole point is don't spend all day on the past and then you leave a little bit of window about the future. You've got to be working from the future backwards and thinking about it. And the venture building and the venture investing, that's really what it's about. And this concept of thinking of yourself in terms of a portfolio, and thinking about yourself in terms of this, being able to have a growth engine. But you're going to be removing the greatest amount of risk and the least amount of capital. It's going to be very, very responsible and rigorous and robust in the way that you're doing it. And people, I was just giving a talk someplace and they said, we're big companies and big companies are risk averse. And I just said, did you see my first 3 slides talking about 88% of the people 50 years ago were out of business? That you're leaving $4 trillion on the table? You got to start looking at risk through that lens. That's way bigger risk than placing small bets, venture building and venture investing.
Well, the biggest risk is that you'll be irrelevant tomorrow and you'll cease to exist, right? Because the world doesn't need you any longer. And that's why, and I love that message, stop being focused on administering the past success, start looking towards the future, and corporate venturing can offer you a tool set to be able to do that. Now, Linda, I'm a bit mindful of your time. I could really go on for hours. It's always great to speak with someone that's in the same discipline. Of course, someone with your experience and expertise. It's definitely humbling. But just
you're a revolutionary with what you're doing with your own organization. So the fact that you're providing this podcast, but you're eating your own dog food, which is super important. And I think that's the thing. We should reverse this, and you should be the interviewee on your own podcast, because I think the stuff that you've achieved and what you're doing is quite extraordinary. And I think it does, but it takes leadership. It takes the CEO. Like, if we have a company approach us and it's somebody at the middle management who's just so excited about entrepreneurship, we can't work with them because we know that it doesn't trickle up. It is there's literally a whole the last I don't know if it's chapter 9 or chapter, I think it's chapter 10. It's the last chapter of my book, which is literally specifically for the C-suite. And it literally starts out with dear CEO, CMO, board member, CRO, CFO, CTO, CIO, CHRO, Chief Strategy Officer, Head of Innovation, this chapter is for you. Because if without that leadership, and my point about that PwC, the 40% of the 4,400 CEOs who say they're going to be out of business, their companies will be no longer economically viable in 10 years without transforming. I'm like, that's your job. Like, no bemoaning, no whining. Like, that is literally what you were in the position to do. And so I think, hats off to you and what you're doing and to your success. Super, super exciting. That's why we love to work ourselves out of a job. I basically have a metric I use in my team. It's how many of our clients are really good friends of ours long after we're done working with them. Because it says 2 things. Number one, we're done working with them. We've built capability, not dependency, because it's proving that it can be done and that you truly care about that individual and their growth and the growth of their organization, the growth of their community, and frankly, their ability to change the world, because that's what you all have the ability to do.
No, I think you're there to teach, right? And once you've been successful at empowering an organization, you move on.
Learning by doing. No academic theoretical exercises. It's all got to be about execution and learning by doing. So
it's basically vocational training, right? For venture.
Yeah. Exactly. Perfect.
Well, Linda, it's been really wonderful, and we'll put as much as we can in the show notes, so that people can also reference to what you've been talking about through some sources, but of course also then reach you and your organization. And thank you so much for your time.
It's easy to reach me. I'm Linda at Mach49.com, so it's pretty easy. I will send you the St. Gallen report. I will send you the new venture assessment tool that we use for people to think about. I think it's also in the book as well. I'll send you a couple of things that you can put in the show notes.
Great. All right, then we continue the crusade for successful corporate venturing. And all the best to you in Utah, here from Zurich. and look forward to catching up with you again soon. Take care.
Thanks so much, Nils.
Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us again today. I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and I really appreciated the insight that it gives into corporate venturing and how we can transform organizations with the help of these tools. Please follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. We look forward to welcoming you again next time here at Impulse, brought to you by Rahal New Ventures. Thank you. Over and out.